Time for the Weird and Wacky segment.
Abominable snowman.
He's not an axe murderer.
One of the TAs turned out to be a bot.
All right, Sanjay, what's our first Weird and Wacky article for today?
So this is Weird and Wacky, or at least in the Weird and Wacky section, but I kind of think it's weird and awesome.
Yeah.
It's the first Google Translate for elephants.
Nice.
And so it's actually, I don't think it's actually an app or anything, but it's a guide.
It's like a repository of information,
that tells
right?
you when an elephant does this,
Yeah.
depending on the sex, if it's male or female, this is what it's meaning. Right?
Okay.
And when I read this article, to me, what it really highlights is the fact that just because we as humans don't understand what animals are saying to each other does not make them dumb. It kind of makes us dumb for not being able to understand them. And this gets us a little bit closer. And like some of the things that they're saying that elephants are saying to one another, it's like, yeah, they're like regular, they're almost like people. Like they're saying things to one another.
Actively communicating, right? I mean, like that. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I'm reading a book right now I think it's called 12 Rules for Life or 12 Rules for Living. But one of the points he makes is like, the massive amount of things that we don't see and we're totally blind to and don't know. And like we tend to have this worldview like, oh, I get it. I see everything coming. And the reality is we really don't see crap. Like we see like 5% of the actual reality that's happening around us, right? And so to your point, we assume that we understand elephants. And yet we vastly do not understand elephants, right? And this points that out. So yeah, that's great.
I think that's true of like almost any animal or species, right? Like we don't even if you think about just the smells of the day, right? Like dogs are able to smell so much better than us. We are missing out on so many things.
Yeah.
They probably understand the smelling world. Is that a thing? The smelling world?
Much
better than us.
I'll go with it. I'll go with the smelling world. Yeah.
The smelling world. Yeah. Talk about something that's not smelling and maybe is better for you, but there is a miraculous mosquito hack which cuts dengue by 77%. So
what's the hack?
This is
this the one we talked about before?
No. So before we talked about how they were releasing sterilized male mosquitoes, right? Didn't Google have some part of that?
I don't remember. Yeah, somebody did. Yeah. Right.
It was somebody, and it was pretty effective. What this is that they figured out that there is this bacteria that sits in the same place in a mosquito's body where dengue, the virus, sits. And so by infecting the mosquitoes, and this doesn't hurt the mosquitoes, by infecting them with this, it competes for resources and reduces the ability for dengue virus to get infected inside of the mosquito, which that's the vector that goes from person to person. And that's how people get infected with this. So the fascinating thing about this is that this mutation that they've caused or this acceptance of this bacteria, actually can live from generation to generation of mosquitoes. So what that means is at some point you could actually reduce and maybe even eliminate dengue being transmitted by mosquitoes by using this technique, which is fascinating.
Man.
So they said 400 million people a year get infected. This is one of the biggest virus issues that we've got around the world. So
man, that's amazing.
Fascinating, right? Like, isn't that just like, you wouldn't have thought about that. Like, hey, let's make the mosquitoes have better immune systems.
Yeah.
And that'll protect us.
Let's fix the mosquitoes so we can fix us. I like that a lot. Well, speaking of fixing things, Drug Ring's, quote, favorite new encrypted platform had one flaw. The FBI controlled it. So these drug rings and these criminal organizations would buy encrypted devices for communication that they could use for encrypted communication. The problem was these devices were actually put into the market by the FBI, and every message was being copied over to the FBI. So I kind of love this, and it's also kind of terrifying because, like, what about people that aren't organized crime that are using these encrypted devices? Are they also so there's that kind of thing too. But this is fascinating. I mean, what's your take on all this?
Yeah. So this story, it's so funny that this came out now because I have been watching the show Startup on Netflix.
Okay.
And it's a few years old apparently, but it just surfaced for me. It was like one of the popular shows recently in the US or whatever on Netflix. And there's 3 seasons. I'm in the 3rd season. And so it started out, they had created a cryptocurrency. And then it moved over time into the 2nd season, and they created a dark web network. So an encrypted, private, secure network. And in this 3rd season, the NSA is trying to get into it and leveraging their people to give them access to it. It's basically this story in real life.
Wow.
And so it's kind of funny. And I think we've said it before, like, look, you should use encrypted platforms,
Right.
privacy. But if there's really something that you don't want anybody to know,
Don't type it.
don't type it.
Don't type it.
Only tell it to people.
Don't type
And
it.
if you don't want anybody to know, don't tell it to anybody.
Just don't tell
even
anybody.
Write it down. Keep it
Yeah.
in your brain.
Yeah.
Keep it in your brain. Right now, as of this point, we don't know of a way to hack your brain and get that information out. So
Right.
it should be safe. But at some point, maybe there's a product for that. So then don't even think it then. So if so I don't know how that works. If you have something that you don't want anybody to know, don't think it. But if you've already thought that you've got something, then it's too late because then you've already thought it and then they're going to know it. So right now you're safe. So just don't type it is what we're saying.
Wow. Well, speaking of last thing you should not
We are
do.
in weird and wacky.
and-
so, we got to
Yeah.
go weird and wacky.
We're going to go down the rabbit hole. So speaking of things you should not do, and this is not necessarily tech related, but I couldn't help but
She
tag
should
it.
have kept this in her brain and not
Oh
done
my
it.
gosh. So, quote, I did this to prove a point. Mom arrested for posing as 13-year-old daughter at school. So apparently this mother is, I think, in her mid-30s.
Yep.
And recognized that the school really wasn't paying attention to the kids in class. They were actually giving too much attention to the kids online, and recognized that there was really a security issue here. And the mom also happens to be incredibly short. I think she's like less than 5 feet tall. So she dressed as her daughter and went to school as her daughter, apparently wearing a mask. So I didn't really understand that part, because she said she took off her mask for lunch and expected to get caught then, but never did. But she made it literally all the way to the last period of the day, the last class. And finally, the teacher in the last class says, so-and-so, I need to see you after class. And, called her by her daughter's name. And then she came up and she said, okay, you're not so-and-so. Who are you? And ended up, getting found out. And then she comes out and says, oh, I did this to prove a point. And of course, now she's being arrested because, that's kind of illegal. So, yeah.
To say the least, kind of.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's fascinating. It's an interesting social experiment. I'm glad she's bringing attention to security concerns around schools, but maybe don't do that next time. That's all I'm trying to think. So,
Maybe there was a better way, right?
Yeah.
Maybe instead of if you think the TSA is not scanning properly for guns, maybe you shouldn't take guns there. Maybe you should talk to somebody else about it first.
Yeah. I feel like
unless the
there's
TSA
other
hires you. If the TSA hires you, you're good. Like, people have done that, right? Like, companies will hire hackers to hack into their own companies to show them some of their own vulnerabilities. Like, that is a legit thing.
Right.
We'll do that.
Right.
You, though, were not hired by anybody, and
Nope.
going rogue and trying to do this,
Doesn't end well.
not okay.
Not at all.